Hello, welcome to this short presentation, and also thank you very much for taking the time to access this file and spend a bit of time listening to what we've got to say. My name is Seamus Allison and I represent a research team based in Nottingham. By way of background, Nottingham City Council and Nottingham Business School have been working together in partnership over the last few years and plan to do so over the next few years to evaluate the broader cycling provision within the City of Nottingham. This presentation reports on one particular element of that evaluation as it relates to the perceptions of a new piece of cycling infrastructure in the city, the Western Cycle Corridor. The purpose of the evaluation of the Western Cycle Corridor was to get a better understanding of the perception of users of the infrastructure and also what their motives were for using it and cycling more generally. Bit of context to this: Nottingham City Council enjoys one of the highest spends per head of population on cycling amongst English unitary authorities. Although having said that, cycling's mode share is modest at around 4.5% of journeys at best. However, the city is quite ambitious and has a carbon neutral or has a target to be carbon neutral by 2028. And policymakers, practitioners believe that cycling has a contribution to make towards achieving that goal. A word about the research methods. The City Council was employing a multi-item on-street questionnaire. In any event, they were planning to evaluate perceptions of the Western Cycle Corridor. Nottingham Business School got involved and suggested a number of additional questions to help gain a better understanding of perceptions and motives. And so the questionnaire is made up of a number of standard questions, typical and shared by previous surveys of NCC, plus a number of newer questions designed more specifically for that purpose of more nuanced analysis. The data was collected along the Western Cycle Corridor, a range of locations along that corridor, and also by other means such as online. There were 3 pieces of analysis performed on the data that was available. The first was to identify user segments of people who were most likely to begin to cycle more or begin to cycle at all following the implementation of the new infrastructure. Also, there was an analysis of the quantitative data to help better understand the motives for cycling, and the respondents' verbatim written comments were used to generate or identify a number of key themes that were important to respondents. This particular presentation addresses item 2 on that list of 3. So a little bit more detail about the analytical methods that we used. Firstly, in order to generate some contingency tables, we performed some cross-tabulation analysis. That helped us draw some comparisons and allowed us to identify certain characteristics of the respondents. That data went on to help us with the identification of a number of key segments, which I cover in a different presentation. In order to better understand the motivations for using the Western Cycle Corridor, there were 2 types of analysis performed. The first, factor analysis, to help better understand the reasons for using the corridor, the factors influencing the use of the corridor, and any reservations that might have existed. And also we performed tests for between group differences such as t-test and ANOVA to look at whether different groups had responded in different ways and whether they thought differently about the factors that we were analysing. Briefly, some of the strengths and limitations of the research. We had 581 responses in total, with a margin of error of 3%. I think this is likely to be a strength of the research, and it's probable that the responses we got are, they're likely to be representative of the broader range of cyclists in the city. There were no noticeable differences between how people responded dependent on the type of response vehicle that they use. So on-street responses were broadly in line with online and so on. Not everyone responded to all the questions, so there is missing data. And that varied from question to questions. Some of the categories include quite small numbers of responses. So when looking at those particular categories in detail, we might need to apply some caution. Also, many of the questions were not specifically designed for the more nuanced statistical analysis that we employed. So alongside those bespoke questions, we were using questions not initially designed for this purpose. However, we were able to test for statistical significance, and we have reassured ourselves that the responses we have, or I should say the results we have, and how we analysed and crunched the data did demonstrate that it was statistically significant. Some of the results then, from the cross tabulation, just a summary of some of the highlights. We found that men tended to cycle greater distances than women. And by greater distances, we class that as 4 miles or more. Marginally more men started to cycle than women since the opening of the Western cycle corridor. These first 2 points can be explored in more detail in Appendixes 1 and 2 at the back of this presentation. We found that 18 to 24-year-olds were more likely to travel shorter distances than older age groups. And generally, for those people who were starting to cycle, those who were aged under 24 had switched from traveling by bus or commuting by bus, and those above 25 tended to have switched from the car. Looking at the factor analysis and between group differences, some of the highlights following that analysis, we find 4 principal drivers or motivators emerged, which we've called well-being, ease and convenience, necessity and personal circumstances, and personal image. Women, we found, were more likely to switch to cycling for reasons of well-being. Younger cyclists, the data showed, are more likely to be cycling for reasons of ease and convenience. In fact, as age increases, convenience becomes less important. Those who cycle most frequently again do so for the reasons of ease and convenience or because of necessity. They have no other available options. Longer journeys tended not to relate to ease and convenience or necessity. And we found that issues of personal image tended to be a constraint, preventing people or making it harder for people from cycling more or indeed cycling at all. The 4 key drivers in more detail. Ease and convenience. This related to factors such as a quick journey time is important to me, avoiding traffic congestion, shorter journey time is important, and a hassle-free journey. Regarding well-being, issues such as feeling good about themselves, fitting with a lifestyle, and health and well-being being important, they were reflected in that category. In factor 3, necessity and circumstance, no longer having access to a car was a driver for cycling, or being unable to drive, or a change of workplace or home address that made it more likely that cycling was the best option. And the fourth factor regarding personal image, some people felt that they felt a little bit of a fool riding, and they had reservations and hoped that their friends wouldn't see them cycling. Again, something that was reported. Quick summary then of the key points. Men using the corridor tended to ride greater distances than women. The opening of the corridor seems to have motivated more men to travel by bike than women. Women were more likely to cite well-being as a motivation for cycling than men were, although that was marginal. Younger cyclists tended to travel under 4 miles. Older cyclists were prepared to travel greater distances. Younger cyclists tended to have given up walking or public transport, whereas older cyclists had tended to give up commuting by car. Ease and convenience are more likely to be motivators for younger than older people. There appeared to be a positive relationship between ease and convenience and the number of times per week that people use the corridor. So if ease and convenience was the principal driver, people tended to cycle more days in the week. And there was a negative relationship between ease and convenience and distance traveled, and also duration. Clearly there's a relationship between those two ideas there. Perceptions of ease and convenience appear to be factors in causing people to change habit and take up cycling, both for those who cycled before and those who didn't. So this perception of ease and convenience seemed to be really quite important in the context of this piece of infrastructure. The analysis has already been shared with senior management at Nottingham City Council and with the Greater Nottingham Cycle Development Group. This type of analysis is relatively new to Nottingham City Council, this type of more nuanced statistical analysis. Management felt it provided a level of insight that they'd not been able to achieve from previous surveys that they'd done. And there is an intention to apply this technique again to further evaluation that Nottingham Business School and Nottingham City Council will be conducted in partnership. Also, the insights that we've gained from the study and specifically the analysis will be shared with other local authorities via conferences and practitioner publications and so on. And indeed, this process has already started following a number of meetings with other local authorities bordering Nottingham City. If you want to know more about the data regarding length of journey time and gender preference and the overall length of journey and the kind of distances involved there and the age groups involved, then Appendix 1 and here Appendix 2 will help with that. Habit change depending on gender is available in Appendix 3. So thank you very much for taking the time again to listen to this short presentation, and I hope you found some of that useful.